at NEOM, which is also located in Saudi Arabia. The $500 billion land project for sustainable and a new way of living was also being led by Arendano. She serves as a board member of the steering committee and a member of the World Tourism Forum in Lucerne, Switzerland. A passionate advocate on a transformative power of tourism and the prospect it presents for combining conservation and community, culture and commerce. She spends a lot of her time engaging presidents, prime ministers, and tourism ministers on using tourism as a force for good, and has interviewed hundreds of government officials and CEOs globally on the key challenges facing the industry. Obviously, Arendano is going to bring some of that wealth of experience to the discussion and contextualize it in a way where we can now move from just having conversations to developing an action list that we can implement going forward. In the past, she has worked with Jones Lang LaSalle, a strategic consulting practice in Europe and Asia, as well as hospitality operations in India. She's a keen industry practitioner, and she's a regular speaker, moderator, and presenter at the foremost family office conferences, as well as tourism leadership summits around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Arendano Kowalo. Thank you so much.
Woo, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've had some coffee this afternoon after that delicious lunch. If you haven't, don't worry, because this session is going to shake you, wake you, provoke you, and if nothing else, it's going to have the same impact as a double shot of espresso. Now, we get started, shall we? If you want to solve some of the biggest problems facing humanity, you need to have a bias for action. But not just a bias for action, you need a bias for collaborative action. Why? Because we just can't solve all the problems in the world ourselves. It requires broad partnerships and working well with a diverse group of people towards a larger goal. In fact, we just don't need to be open to working with others. We need to actively seek out others to work with and solve a bigger problem. And that starts with leaders who are open to listening, leaders who are humble enough to admit that they don't have all the answers, leaders who are hungry to come together to solve the big problems facing humanity. The key is putting yourself on par in a true and equal partnership, even being in service to others. It requires humility. But that's how you build common ground, that's how you go for win-wins, and that's how you bridge gaps and build trust. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage, we have 6 amazing leaders who fit that description pretty well, and they're here to discuss how you can use a multi-destination strategy, not just to stimulate more tourism in the Caribbean, Americas, and West Africa, but really talk about more broadly how multi-destination strategy can be used to build resilience into the tourism model globally. In no specific order, starting with the man of the moment, Honorable Minister Edmund Bartlett. Sir, please. Next up, Honorable Minister Kenneth Bryan. Honorable Minister Dr. Pratt from Sierra Leone. Ms. Nicola Madden-Gregg, President of CHTA, Mr. Donovan White, Director of Tourism, Jamaica Tourism Board, and last but not the least, we have Marie McKinsey, who's the SVP, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, Carnival Cruise Line. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just take a second to applaud? We have actually reached 50% gender diversity, and that deserves an applause. My dear panelists, we're going to make this fun. We're going to make this really quick and funky. And I want to start from the left to the right. Let's build some context. let's have a discussion. Tell me in one word, no more than one sentence. Let's start with the benefits of a multi-destination strategy. Let's start with the benefits for the destination, and then we will go right to left and talk about benefits for the travelers. So what do you think are the benefits, one benefit, of a multi-destination strategy for the destination? I'll start with you, Marie. Just a single word answer will do, one sentence, one benefit.
Oh, sorry about that. Excuse me, I lost my voice. I'm going to do my best. One word?
Yeah.
Economic activity.
Exactly right. Okay, so more tourism dollars, money, money,
Absolutely.
money.
Absolutely.
Donovan.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'd say there's an old maxim that says, rising tide, rise all boats. I believe in a region where you have large and small countries, I believe this is something that can definitely benefit all.
Fantastic, stronger together. Nicola, were you smiling because he took that saying of yours?
Almost did, but I think I'll use a Jamaican saying, which is, even though we're little, we're Talawa. So I think a multi-destination strategy is a Talawa approach.
Fantastic. Dr. Pratt, benefit to the destination.
One word is multiculturalism. One word, multiculturalism.
Why you
Minister
ask
Brian.
all the smart people first? I would say the allowing people to fall in love with this region before any other.
Right.
Because the Caribbean is a special place.
Excellent. And words of wisdom from Minister Bartlett.
Shared growth.
Right. Now we're going to go, starting with Minister Bartlett, all the way down to Marie. Minister Bartlett, from the traveler's perspective, why does a multi-destination strategy make sense if you're a tourist?
Firstly, it is a cost-effective arrangement,
Right.
which enables multiple experiences within one package.
Fantastic.
And that's really enabling value for money. In closing, I would say it is a strong customer value proposition.
Excellent. Minister Brian, you're second now.
Repeat the question again.
The benefit of a multi-destination strategy from a tourist perspective. So why would they want to visit multiple countries?
Well, I'll have to steal the minister's viewpoint before. The cultural exposure.
Right, so you get to experience multiple.
Yeah, more than one, yeah.
Excellent.
It gives the traveler an opportunity of using an ideal budget to see many destinations.
Right.
So there is advantage in terms of resources which the traveler is using.
Great.
For me, it's more the psychosocial. It's the inspiration. It's that feeling of connectivity, just being able to experience so much wonder and beauty in one trip. I think that's really the element for me, the more aspirational side of it.
Fantastic.
I believe that there is a real opportunity for travelers who travel really long haul, travel 17, 18 hours to get to a destination, and you're only able to spend your time sometimes 10, 12, 14 days in one place. You may want the value-added opportunity to explore other parts of the same region if it can be facilitated. I believe it enhances the travel experience. It allows for all the other things that we've said before in terms of the diversification of use of culture and all the amenities. So definitely, I think that the opportunity to engage long-haul travel, for example, we're talking Africa, Caribbean today,
Got
perfect
it.
opportunity.
Perfect. Excellent. Marie, final words.
I think it's interesting that I'm at the end of this string because, in summary, this is what cruise provides. Value. No, really, it does. Value, a multicultural experience, growth, education from a guest perspective and learning different destinations. on one itinerary.
That's fantastic. The share price shoots up for Carnival as we speak.
That's right.
Minister Bartlett, if I may ask you, we know single visas and seamless border travel and services are at the core of a multi-destination strategy. And we now know it can generate billions and, increase the tourism flows and receipts. But building multilateral partnerships in an industry which is as fragmented as tourism is no child's play, right? I mean, we heard the former Prime Minister speak this morning. There are some countries where tourism is still not recognized as an industry. There are some where there is no Minister for Tourism. And there are others where there is a Minister of Tourism, but he or she is completely sidelined. Now, you have batted on this wicket before. So tell us, what would be your words of advice to someone, let's say West Africa, Dr. Pratt, who's getting into the multi-destination strategy? What would be your advice to someone starting new so they can get it right at the outset and learn from your experience?
I think the big elephant in the room for multi-destination tourism is something called political will, drawn from a sense of sovereignty and wanting to be nationalistic. Countries must recognize that to enable a sharing, it means harmonizing policies. It means looking at how do we rationalize certain protocols and how do we yield a certain level of sovereignty to enable a broader opportunity for collaboration. And I think that the difficulty that some countries have is that each has its own border policies and protocols that are driven by varying types of even multilateral arrangements. And for the Western Africa, I believe that East Africa has done something that's worth looking at. They were able to get it together. The Europeans have gotten it together with a Schengen visa, which allows you to visit one country and have domestic status through the rest of the countries. We in the Caribbean need to do that. We toyed with the idea with the World Cup cricket when we had a Caribbean passport, Caribbean visa that operated well for the short period of time, but we have abandoned, and I think much of it again is laid at the feet of nationalistic, sovereignty issues and so on. So at the heart of it, to get it right, we have to decide that it's a sharing now. It's harmonizing policies and it's rationalizing protocols.
Fantastic. I'm going to pick up on something that he said, Minister Brian, if you don't mind. Because at the core of a successful multi-destination strategy is a condition that each country has to give some degree of national interest, right? And my question is, how do you get social and economic cohesion while still retaining that sovereignty?
Money. The one thing that drives all human beings, and I always say this in almost everything I analyze, is the one thing that pushes people is not is prosperity and opportunity to feed their loved ones. And if you show the financial gain to any policy advisor or policy maker, he can then take that back to his constituents or her constituents and say, we're doing this for you because it's a benefit for you. I think what we have failed at is within the leadership groups and the decision makers is that analysis that you can quantify it. I use the example of us with our national airline, Cayman Airways. Now we lose on that airline every year, but we don't see it as a loss because we know that that airline is an economic accelerator. We know that we may spend $10 million to subsidize it, but the amount of economic opportunity we get on the back end is probably 5 times the amount of that. And we have to carry that formula into multi-destination travel because it reminds me of the famous word my good colleague and minister said, competing. Because we can do this together and all win. And until we understand that in a quantitative way, Only then can we deliver it.
Fantastic. I'm going to pick up on something else Minister Bartlett said for you, Dr. Pratt. East Africa, he mentioned, because now East Africa has a visa facilitation between Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. And I think in the western coast, Benin and I think Gambia has a free visa program. How would an ideal multi-destination strategy look like in West Africa for Sierra Leone? Who would you collaborate with? What's your dream team?
For Sierra Leone, the first thing I would say for West Africa is that we have what we call the ECOWAS passport. Once you have the ECOWAS passport, you actually don't need visa to go in all the 15 countries. And we are actually now looking at each of those countries and seeing what they are doing. For Sierra Leone, we have introduced visa on arrival. So you only need to come to the airport, and then you can pay for your visa. It also applies to Ghana, to Nigeria, to the Gambia, and there are also other kinds of visa arrangements. So in terms of access, West Africa seems to be doing well, especially Anglophone West Africa, in terms of opening up the space. And I should say that what we have challenge with is land borders, you know, because we have a number of people who may want to travel from one place to another because the distances are short. But you know the usual, the land borders have difficulties as a result of the fact that each country, we have different ways of dealing with our police, our military, or what have you. But one policy which ECOWAS has just brought about is the movement of persons, free movement of persons. We've all signed into that protocol for free movement of persons. So which means you can move, you know, from one place to another. And they have introduced ECOWAS ID cards for West Africa, which you can use to move. So in terms of the institutional framework, the region and government, we've been able to do it. But the problem is we've not been able to get our people to understand what we are doing. You know, we say one thing, and then when people go to the borders, they are totally different things. But I'd like to add that multi-destination is a tool for a very strong political social cohesion. When you do multi-destination program, you support weaker marketing countries. For instance, you have countries which may not have the resources, but if you bring them on the program, you are able to support them in terms of them earning something, because we all know that some countries may be more attractive or have more facilities or more opportunities than the other. But in the multi-destination approach, you have an opportunity of building a cooperative venture. You have an opportunity of having an arrangement, you know, cooperative arrangements that can ensure that each and every person in the value chain has something to offer. And it will help hotels. Maybe if you have hotels in certain areas that may not be having as much guests as possible, you are helping that hotel to survive. If you have workers in certain places who may think that they are losing jobs, but if you have this approach, you can. So what I would say is that with multi-destination approach, is about stability, it's about social cohesion, it's about reducing poverty, it's about bringing on board integrative regional development. With all of these frameworks we have, you have CARICOM, you have ECOWAS, you have IGAD, I mean, you just name it, you have East African Community. If we go into this, it's really going to pull us together, and we are going to have more resources, and we are going to take care of our people much, much better.
Fantastic. I'm actually going to pick up, Nicola, something that Minister Pratt said. Strong destinations cannot exist in fragile regions. And what she alluded to was interesting, because the level of infrastructure, development, talent, expertise, resources varies a lot depending on who's your neighbor. How do you then ensure, well, the input is proportional and the results are also equitable when they're divided?
Yes.
Minister Pratt, if Nicola can, and then I'll come back to you after.
So I lead an organization which is the CHTA, Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. We have 33 destinations in the Caribbean. And what you have to do is look at how can we work collaboratively. It may not be equal for every single thing that you do, but if everybody is being exposed, people will be exposed to different markets. So, for example, Jamaica's main markets are the USA, UK, USA, but then in the Eastern Caribbean, it's more European markets. So it is maybe not equitable in terms of you're going to get the same amount of visitors from these different markets, but if the overall overarching growth, as we said, everybody moves up, it may be different source markets that move. But it's also important that we fix things internally for the Caribbean, in particular when we're talking about multi-destination, because it's not only about the policy from the governmental side in terms of the visa and entry requirements, but also the issues we have around availability of airlift. Because even when we are bringing in over 32 million people to the Caribbean now, and most of them are only going to one destination. But if we break down the other barriers in terms of having availability of flights at a price point that is more attractive, then we will immediately see that moving into people choosing 2 or 3 destinations. So I think overall it is allowing us to be able to look at the various source markets, saying to our various destinations, this is where you're going to see growth. You may not see it over here because that's not your core market. But overall, if we push out together and maybe in different nodes, we had this discussion, Minister Bryan, earlier, the Northern Caribbean may need to move as a unit, while the Eastern Caribbean may need to move as a unit. But when we look at one Caribbean strategy, everybody understands that the Caribbean is not a place you visit once. It's a place you visit numerous times because of the diversity of the region.
Right. Fantastic. Donovan, when you hear the old cliche that the Caribbean is the destination for sun, sea, and sand, which is totally not representative of the diversity and the uniqueness of the destination, do you look at the multi-destination strategy as an effective solution for busting these myths? And how can you build the one Caribbean destination overall strategy while still developing brand Jamaica?
You know, when I started in this job 5 years ago, one of the first things I did was I Googled tourism in the Caribbean. And what I got on my screen was a dashboard of blue. And within that dashboard, everybody was included. The truth is, where's the differentiation? So the question is a poignant one. And one of the first things that we landed on was, how do we begin to differentiate ourselves? So that's the Jamaica story. And it really was about looking inward rather than towards the shores, and being able to bring to bear on the audiences around the world the many aspects of Jamaica that's available within our tourism products. So that's the Jamaica story. And I think that there is that story that is able to be told for every country across the Caribbean, to be very frank. But I think I want to include in my answer the pivot to Nicola began to talk about airlift, and because I think it's at the heart of the development of multi-destination tourism. And today, there is 10 independently owned airline flying across the Caribbean, point to point, mostly short haul, and doing so, I would say, mostly ineffectively. Today there are 3 alliances, airline alliances across the world: SkyTeam, Oneworld, and Star. And I cannot understand what is preventing the Caribbean from having the 4th major airline alliance in the world, which then provides the network connectivity that will enable the movement of people seamlessly. And I take that word from Minister Bartlett because he uses it often and well when we speak. But the truth is, for multi-destination to be developed and to work effectively, there has to be seamless connectivity across the region. And there's a lot of other pieces that we've mentioned here, including a lot of the policy framework that needs to form itself properly and adequately to support that kind of networking of the connectivity. But without that, it's going to be a great conversation, a great paper to write, but without the connectivity, it's not coming off the ground.
All roads lead to Minister Bartlett. It's what he says is the move away from competition to co-petition, right? Fantastic. Murray, Carnival cruises extensively in the Caribbean, but tell us, from a multi-destination strategy, how do you identify what destinations are really well suited for MDS?
Where we go is highly driven. Don't fail me. Is highly driven by demand, where our guests want to go. However, for example, you mentioned Carnival Cruise Line. I work with Carnival Corp, where we have 9 global brands, but 8 are cruising in the Caribbean. Carnival Cruise Line is our year-round brand in the region. And they have nicely positioned themselves in various home markets in the U.S., home ports in the U.S., to bring different guests from around the U.S. into the region. How they decide where they go depends on how quickly those ships can get there in a 7-day itinerary, typically. However, it's also heavily driven on demand. Where do our guests want to go? And I think it's so important that as a region, and everyone has said this, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's so important that every destination is uniquely and authentically identified for us to be able to build an itinerary in a way where guests feel like they're getting on a ship and they will have a multitude of experiences coming into the region, because we absolutely have that to offer.
Fantastic. Minister Bartlett, I'm back to asking you. When we talk about a multi-destination strategy and its role in building, I think we all have a unanimous, violent agreement that it's a great strategy, right? But I want to talk about what is the role of multi-destination strategy in building resilience in tourism? How can it help protect us against future shocks, disasters, pandemics?
Right, so we begin that multi-destination has 2 critical elements to it. One is legislative, which is public policy and what the government's role is in enabling that. And we dealt with that a little bit early on when we spoke about harmonization of policies and rationalization of protocols and so on. Then there is the second critical area, which is marketing and the development of a product, which now is the responsibility of the private sector. And it is the private sector that will have to develop a product that can be marketed across regions. Luckily for us in the Caribbean, we do have common brands. And most of our destinations have the same brands operating. There's sandals in almost every country in the Caribbean. There's some Spanish brands that we have that are also common to the region. So how do we get those 2 elements to come together? How do we get the governments of the region to harmonize policies and to enable for the seamlessness that Donovan spoke about, which is a word from me, and how do we get the entrepreneurs of the region now to come together and to create a single product which is packaged and priced so that it will have an attractiveness to the market. And I'm excited about the prospect of the latter, because I really think that getting airlines to be interested in your space must begin that there is a product. And to define the product is the challenge. Donovan mentioned that when he looked, first of all, at his dashboard, he saw a blue spot, and that was that. And so the issue is, how do you differentiate? So within that space now is the notion of what makes this product alive and exciting to the market. And what makes it alive and exciting is diversification and differentiation. So that whilst you are selling a product in terms of its geographical area, you're selling multiple experiences. And that's the issue, to create multiple experiences that will respond to the passion points of travelers, bearing in mind that people travel to fulfill their passions.
Great. You want to add something? Please, go ahead.
I
And there you go. Thank you. I just think I had to throw this in because after the rep from Carnival said about customers and they follow the demand, and then Minister Bartlett talking about creating the product and experiences, what is the product? And then I think back about what you hear about what customers want today. They no longer want sun, sea, and sand because all of us on Earth in the Caribbean region fall within that hot zone. So we all have that. So they come for something else. The people, the experiences, the culture. What is the culture? The culture is our history. How did the Caribbean got developed? And I think we have an opportunity to have multi-destination travel by selling the history of how we became who we are. He's a descendant of Africa, so am I. And most of the Caribbean region have a story to say, whether it's the Dutch, the French, the British territories. How was the Caribbean developed? Because each one of us having sun, sea, and sand. Why are you coming here? Why is she wearing the clothes that she wears? Why do I speak the way I speak? Why am I speaking patois? What are those stories? And pinpoint them back to something that is interesting to the consumer. How did this all start? How was the takeover of the Caribbean when the Arawaks and the Indians were here? Sell that, because each and every one of us in the Caribbean and Africa have a part to play in that story, and it's an amazing one. And if we sell that together, you can come from Cayman to Jamaica, because Jamaica has a different part of that story, different chapters of it, and come and read our history.
I love that. Real people, real places, real stories. Absolutely love that. Minister Pratt, if I can bring you in here. When we talk about a multi-destination strategy, we often depend on development assistance from World Bank, IFC, or USAID, or whatever. And they often tend to be country-focused and not necessarily have the mechanisms in place for an effective regional cooperation. How do you navigate that challenge?
Well, interestingly, I think slowly that trend is changing. Because if I go back to the World Bank, who is one of the financiers in my country for economic diversification, they are also popularizing the model in Liberia. And they are also in Ghana as well. So gradually it is changing. But what I think is important to note is that we have all realized, including our donors and partners, that countries have got natural resources, but to some extent, maybe they are not able to explore those natural resources for economic diversification or for tourism. For instance, if you take Sierra Leone's natural resource, which people know in history has been diamond, gold, and then maybe agriculture. But then you look at the country today, there is so much in terms of tourism that has not been exploited. So it is the argument about increasing livelihoods, creating the jobs, and bringing integrative economic development, and then, of course, bringing areas like tourism to be able to be part of that economic development of that particular country. So in essence, what I'm saying is the trend is changing, but it is as a result of the fact that we have many more things that could change our livelihoods than what we used to depend on. So we are not only now dependent on the traditional things which we used to know. So they are putting money into this in order that we can use what we have. For instance, we have so many beaches, we have islands, we have ecotourism, we have national parks. We have many different things in Sierra Leone. We have the history, the slave history, the Bones Island, of course. We also have the history with the Caribbean, with Jamaica, with Barbados, and all of those countries because of our shared history. So in essence, what I'm saying is that we are slowly moving towards diversification of the economy. And the donors themselves are now saying, if it can work in this country, then you can also work in that country. And it's really, really in dividend because our GDP is rising as a result of the additional sectors. There are rising tourist numbers that are coming up. And of course, we are also pushing it in terms of rural development. That's the other thing. We want to have access to some of these attractions. So I work with my colleague who is in works. You have to do the road to construct A, B, C, and D. Yeah. I work with my colleague who is in energy. You have to expand energy to all of these places. You have to expand water supply to these places because we have to move the tourists. We have to develop domestic tourism. So in essence now, the narrative is gradually moving as an integrated development strategy for tourism to be able to ramp up all the other sectors of development. And people are gradually seeing it that way. So, for instance, like when you spoke about if you're a minister, you're coming in, you want to convince government, I, from my own experience, will say that you move the integrative development approach of tourism. That tourism is multi-sectoral, it is multidimensional, and tourism has to do with the development of all other sectors, and all those sectors have to make tourism what it is. I think we need to take that away.
Thank you. I have 3 minutes left on the clock, and I want to make sure the three panelists get a minute each, just to be fair. We have to be fair. Nicola, how do you think of community participation, job creation, and new business setups when you have so many destinations to think about?
I don't think it's difficult at all. We did a project with the OAS recently, which was focusing coming out of the pandemic on micro, small, and medium-sized tourism enterprises. Because what we want to ensure is that in our development and use of tourism to propel our countries forward, that no one is left behind. It is really about bringing the entrepreneurial class of the Caribbean to the forefront. Tourism in the Caribbean was started by the mom and pops in the small communities, and then the big players looked on and said, what are these guys doing? They're making money, it's successful, we need to get in. And the big chains came and really helped to drive and promote. And as we continue to grow, we have to make sure that we use tourism to build out our entrepreneurial class of our Caribbean nationals, but also to look at generational wealth. And how do we not just be employees, but we are owners of the product. And so when you're talking about resilience and how multi-destination strategy can drive that, it is ensuring that our entrepreneurial class, whether it is in the core of tourism, accommodations, attractions, or in the support services that will drive that tourism product. So back into the community with tech, we have a lot of young people now are coming. We have distribution strategies that we buy everything from overseas, or website development, everything along those lines. Is it in agriculture? Is it in accounting services, legal services? All of this is available to us and to our nationals to push as the backward linkages into tourism. So that's how we build resilience. So it's not just about the top line level, but everything else, and ensure that we have wealth generation for our nationals.
Thank you. Donovan, I want to go back to your original point about long-haul tourists. 60 seconds only. I'm sure you have a strategy in place for the long-haul tourists because they travel in groups, have very specific needs, and a multi-destination strategy is right up the alley for someone like that.
It certainly is. And I think the hub-and-spoke model has worked elsewhere in the world. It's worked in the United States perfectly, changed the aviation landscape in the United States. It also did that in Europe. It's doing that now in Asia. And I think what we have to appreciate is we are going to have to take a hard look. Two ministers said it, at how we apply our nationalistic approach to the benefit of the region. I think from a strategic perspective, the region would benefit from possibly 3 hubs: Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Trinidad in the south, so you cover north, center, and south. Being able to connect all carriage right across the region, including the Dutch region. But I think what that does is it facilitates long-haul travel into these hubs if they know they have carriage onwards for distribution of passengers. Obviously, that's where the hub and spoke work, one, but also that's where the alliance, if it ever happens, would work. Because now we talk about competition and cooperation. That's where it works. they have to begin to see that there's a bigger fish, as they say in Jamaica, to fry, if they all work together to move people around the region. It gives every tourism destination across this region an opportunity to grow instantly.
Fantastic.
Because you're now getting incremental arrivals into the region that you never had before. And you're now sharing that arrivals across the region so everybody benefits.
Brilliant.
So I think from the perspective of just truly appreciating what the true meaning of competition is, it is the ability for us to compete on a level playing field where everybody has an opportunity to win.
Excellent. Marie, last famous words. Perhaps a quick one, very quick one. ESG is becoming very prominent now all in everything that we are doing. And given we are the Global Tourism Resilience Conference, your last words on how do you ensure a multi-destination strategy is actually going to be sustainable and build resilience?
So, yeah, wow is right.
And 30 seconds, 60 seconds.
Yeah, wow again. It really goes back to where Minister Bartlett started, and I probably sound like I'm going to contradict what Donovan just said, but it's not a competition. Mm-hmm. It's really where we're working together, and where you started, where you said for us to be successful, we're never standing alone. We really have to come together as a region, whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in Africa, in our various regions. We really need to think about how we work together for this to be sustainable. Because if it's anything beyond that, I don't see how it would be successful.
Thank you. Minister Bartlett, you wanted...
Just very quickly, I wanted to just close the point by saying that what multi-destination does is to create what we call a critical mass to enable the movement of airlines, tour operators, and all the key players to be able to have economy of scale in their operation. So as a single destination, say Jamaica with 3 million, is less attractive to the Emirates flying with 380, 500 to 600 passengers than if they were coming into a Caribbean with 37 million people. Mm-hmm. That's the issue.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible states that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Matthew chapter 9, verse 37. There is so much need in the world and so much good work to do, but just not enough people on board. We need more leaders who are decent, kind, empathetic, and feel an obligation to improve society for everybody. How much of an impact can a group of people have? How much or how many people can they actually inspire to join in? I don't know. We might not have all the answers just yet, but I can tell you it's extremely exciting to explore the potential for real change when you have this lot working on it together. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for my wonderful panelists, and thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Yombe. We're about to start the final panel discussion. So we're going to ask everybody to just please take their seats. All right. Sit. Weren't these people? Yeah. Okay, so the just need everybody to settle down. The last session, quite stimulating conversation. The discussions were very pointed, and it's pushing us in a direction where I think, as I take my notes, we're building an action register with a number of things that we need to follow up on that can advance these discussions. Really, really strong, and Aradano, you did a fantastic job in terms of shepherding and ensuring that those conversations were